Hello, third graders. Today, your learning targets are I can determine the gist of an article and I can describe characteristics of different types of poems. Today, you will determine the gist of an article and describe characteristics of different types of poems. You will need the article, Writer Shows Kids How Cool and Funny Poetry Can Be, your journal, page 14 for day 49, notebook paper, and a pencil. First, let's read. With a family member, caregiver, or friend, read the article for day 49. As you read, make notes about what you learn about characteristics of each poem. Writer shows kids how cool and funny poems can be. When Bob Raska was a kid, he did not like poems. Like many students, he studied poems at school. Most of these poems were very old. They were written hundreds of years ago. They had strange, old-fashioned words in them. Raska, sounds like Raska, grew up in the state of Illinois. He loved climbing trees and playing outdoors. Those activities were more fun than reading old poems, he thought. Poems were just fancy words about pretty flowers or sad people. Raska thought these subjects were boring. Now, Raska feels differently about poetry. As he learned more about poetry, his opinion changed. Raska realized that poems do not have to be serious. They can be about anything at all. They can even be silly. Today, Raska is a poet himself. And this caption here says, Bob Raska learned to love poetry when he realized that poems could be silly and fun. And there's a picture of him. Showing kids that poems can be cool. Raska writes books of poems for kids. He wrote his first one in 2010. It was called Gayuku. Raska wrote it to show boys and girls that poems can be cool. Japanese style of poetry. He wrote the book in a Japanese style of poetry. It's called haiku. A haiku poem has 3 lines. The first and third lines have 5 syllables each. The middle line has 7 syllables. These poems are short. They can still be very descriptive, though. One of Raska's haikus is, The wind and I play, tug of war with my new kite. The wind is winning. Some of Raska's poems are funny too, like this one. If this puddle could talk, I think it would tell me to splash my sister. Raska says that one of the best parts of reading poems is getting to slow down. When you read a book, you read quickly, he says. You want to find out what happens next. Poems are different. Reading a poem gives you an opportunity to take a break. You can stop and think at every line. Concrete poetry makes a shape on the page. Raska has written poems in many different styles. He wrote one book in a style called concrete poetry. In these poems, words create a shape on the page. One example of concrete style is Raska's poem Hopscotch. It is written in the shape of a hopscotch game. The poem has to be read from the bottom of the page to the top. The reader moves up from line to line. This is the same way a hopscotch player would jump up hopscotch squares. Poems that use the letters of just one word. The poems in Raska's book, Lemonade, are also very playful. For this book, Raska set a rule for himself. Each poem would be made up of the letters of just one word. For example, one poem is called Friends. So, the only letters Raska used in this poem were F, R, I, E, N, D, and S. Here is what he came up with. Fred finds Ed. Now let's think about it. What are different types of poems? What are some characteristics of poems? What is the gist of this article? And what inspires writers to write poetry? Think about what you just read and how that can help you answer these questions. Pause the video now and think. Now that you've thought about it, it's time to talk about it. With a family member, friend, or caregiver, talk about these questions. What are the different types of poetry in the article? What are the characteristics of those types of poems? What inspires writers to write poetry? Use the text to help you answer these questions. Pause the video now and talk about it. Now that you're done talking about it, it's time to write. Write what you notice about the different types of poems described in the article and the characteristics of those types of poetry. Write the gist of the article and describe what inspires writers to write poetry according to the author. Thank you, third graders.